So today, we're diving into something called spiritual alchemy. And right away, forget everything you think you know about turning lead into gold. This is about a transformation that is way, way harder. It's a journey deep into the wild and pretty confusing landscape of your own mind. Wow. Okay, so this quote just lays it all out there right from the start. Spiritual alchemy, this inner work, it's not some casual hobby you pick up on the weekend. It's a path that really only opens up out of desperation. That feeling, that absolute need for change that's as urgent as a drowning person fighting for just one more breath of air. And that's really the starting point, isn't it? That intense, all-consuming desire. This journey, it's not for everybody. It's really for those who've hit a wall, a breaking point, where the way things are on the inside just isn't bearable anymore. So what even is alchemy in this sense? Well, think of it like a system, a process for untangling all the complicated knots of your own being. I mean, one source even calls it a science of sainthood, which is a pretty wild way to put it, right? It's this methodical way of reaching a higher state of being. But why would anyone sign up for something so demanding? Well, the payoff is huge. And we're not talking about worldly power here. It's something way more personal, more subtle. It's about liberation. It's about freeing yourself from suffering, dissolving that deep fear of death because you finally understand your true nature. And maybe most importantly, breaking out of what's called your mental prison. Okay, so this whole idea of a mental prison, it's really the core of this whole thing. It's kind of like in the movie The Matrix, right? The idea is that our minds build this reality that we get completely trapped inside of. But, and this is the key, just like any system, it can be hacked. Here's the thing. We're all prisoners of our own minds, of all the conditioning we've picked up over the years. But the mystics, the alchemists, they figured out that there's a kind of back door in the system. There's a way to break our painful attachment to this reality we've constructed for ourselves. Which, of course, begs a huge question. Before you can even talk about escaping a prison, you gotta ask, what even is reality? How are we defining that? So, to get our heads around this, we need to see that we're dealing with two very different types of reality. First, there's your subjective reality. That's your direct, personal, and frankly, chaotic inner world. It's always shifting. Then you have objective reality. That's the consensus world we all agree on, the world of science, language, and numbers that seems so solid and stable. And this is where it gets really trippy. This is the root of our problem. We think we're a solid, fixed thing, a name, a personality, an identity, but our actual, direct, subjective experience is that of a constantly changing process. And that mismatch, that fundamental confusion, that's where so much of our anxiety and unease comes from. So once you start to really see that disconnect, you also start to see, well, the pretty steep price of entry for this whole journey. This path asks for a lot more than just a casual interest. There's real risk involved. Look, here's an uncomfortable truth that nobody really wants to hear. Suffering is often the catalyst. It's the friction, it's that immense pressure that forces you to look for a totally different kind of solution. It's the very thing that fuels that drowning man's desire we talked about at the beginning. So this path is a gamble, a big one. First, it asks you to embrace your suffering, not as something to run from, but as the actual fuel for your transformation. Then, you have to be willing to let go of your identity, everything you think you are. And finally, you have to be ready to risk it all, to take a total leap of faith into the unknown. All right, so you've made the leap. Now the real transformation starts. This is where you begin to build and forge that powerful inner fire. And you know what's kind of crazy? After all that talk of suffering and risk, the tools you actually need are surprisingly simple. You don't need to be a monk in a cave. All you really need is genuine, deep curiosity and a real willingness to expand what you believe is even possible. And right here, this is the alchemical reaction. When your deep curiosity starts to mix with a little bit of faith in the process, it creates wisdom. And this isn't book smarts. It's this deep, gut-level knowing. And that ignites an inner fire, this restless internal obsession with finding out the truth of who you really are. And that fire, it just keeps burning hotter and hotter until, eventually, you break through. You get a direct glimpse of something deeper, a truth that goes way beyond the world of concepts and things we usually live in. And here's the thing, once you see it, once you truly know it in your bones, you can never, ever unknow it. It's a one-way door. The transformation is permanent. Your entire way of being in the world just fundamentally shifts. So as we start to wrap this up, there's one last kind of paradoxical idea we need to unpack. This whole process isn't about adding something new to yourself. It's actually about a great letting go, a dissolution. And a really important piece of advice from the source material is just take your time. Seriously, this isn't a race to some finish line. It's a slow burn. And as you learn to just be with the process, patience just kind of happens. It's a natural side effect. It all comes down to this powerful idea of purification by your own inner fire. It requires you to let that old self, that fixed thing you thought you were, completely burn away. Friedrich Nietzsche put it perfectly. You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? So the final question isn't for me, it's for you. What parts of yourself are you willing to let turn to ash? All right, let's dive into something pretty profound today, the alchemical path. And look, we're not talking about the old cliche of turning lead into actual gold. This is about a much deeper, much more personal kind of transformation, one that can completely change the way you see reality itself. Now, here's the thing. This journey, it isn't something you're just starting out of the blue. The very fact that you're interested in this kind of stuff suggests you're already part of a long, long tradition. You're basically picking up the torch, continuing a legacy of seeking that goes way, way back. So who is this person, this alchemist or seeker? What makes them tick? Well, to really get it, we have to start with how they look at the most basic question of all. What in the world is existence? You see, for the alchemist, existence isn't just the stuff you can touch and see. Not at all. It's the whole inner world. Your thoughts, your feelings, your dreams, even that weird sensation of drifting off to sleep. It's that quiet, constant feeling of being, well, an observer watching your own life unfold from the inside. Okay, so that brings us to the central problem, right? The thing that kicks off this whole quest. For the alchemist, the call to adventure starts with a very specific kind of pain, a suffering that comes from getting reality all mixed up. And here's the fundamental conflict. You've got your inner world, what you actually feel and perceive directly. But then there's this story we tell ourselves, what the source material calls the objective delusion. It's the idea that you are a separate thing out there in the world, a physical object that can get hurt, get old, and eventually die. We mistake that story for the real thing. And honestly, that's where all the anxiety and fear really begins. So what kicks this whole thing off? It's a feeling called disenchantment. You know it. It's that moment when you look at the whole cycle of life. You're born, you work, you age, you die, and you just feel this deep, gut-level disappointment. That little voice that whispers, "Seriously? This is it? There has to be more." Yeah, that's the starting gun. So, if you're feeling that disenchantment, what's the fix? Well, the alchemist doesn't go looking for answers out there in the world. Nope. Their laboratory is their own mind, and they have a very specific, almost scientific method for their work. It's really like a scientific method for your own consciousness. First, you just observe. You put your own moment-to-moment experience under a microscope. Then you analyze it. You break it down into the smallest, most basic parts. After that, you synthesize a new model of reality based on what you found. And finally, you use that new map to re-examine everything all over again. It's a loop, a constant cycle of discovery. Now, that four-step process, it sounds pretty straightforward on paper, right? But oh man, as anyone who's tried will tell you, that very first step, just observing your experience, is incredibly hard. It's like chasing the white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. It's subtle, it's quick, and the harder you look for it, the faster it seems to disappear. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? Our minds are so busy labeling everything, putting it all in boxes, that we can't just experience things directly anymore. So, to even begin, the alchemist has to go backward. It's a journey of regression. But where are you supposed to go back to? The destination is what this framework calls the Garden of Eden. Now, this is not a literal place. It's a state of mind. It's a kind of memory of how things were in infancy. A time before you had words for everything, before you even had the concept of a separate me. A time of just blissful, unworried being. But here's a really, really crucial point. The goal isn't to go back to being a blissful, ignorant baby. That's a total trap. The real goal is to find that state of detached tranquility, to build a stable, calm platform of awareness. From there, you can finally study the crazy storm of your own mind without getting swept away by it. All right, so once you've found that stable place to stand, the real heavy lifting begins. This is, without a doubt, the hardest part of the whole journey. It's about confronting and refining what's called the dross, all that accumulated inner junk that colors how we see the world. So, what is this dross? It's not something gross you just throw away. It's the very fabric of who you think you are. It's a lifetime of beliefs, habits, meanings, and all the programming you've picked up from your culture. Think of it like a filter that sits over your eyes and you don't even know it's there. That dross, that's the raw material for transformation. And this process of refining the dross has a name, Nigredo. It literally means the blackening or the darkness. And this is an active, really courageous process. The alchemist has to learn to intentionally seek out their own inner darkness, not to fight it, but to get to know it, to understand it, because it's only through understanding that it can be transformed. And let's be real here. This phase is deeply unpleasant, and it can even be dangerous. Nigredo often looks a lot like what we'd call severe mental illness. We're talking about deep intellectual despair, hopelessness, helplessness, states that are incredibly painful. You know, most people in this stage have no idea they're on a spiritual path. They just think their life is falling apart. So what's the difference? What separates an alchemist from someone who's just lost in that darkness? It really comes down to one single thing: curiosity. The alchemist has this deep suspicion, this feeling that these horrible symptoms aren't just random noise. They're signals, they're clues, pointing to something deeper that needs to be understood. Okay, so after you go through the fire of the Nigredo, what was the point of all that struggle? Well, all that incredibly hard work opens the door to a breakthrough. It creates the possibility of getting a glimpse of the freedom that's on the other side of all our conditioning. See, all that work, finding that inner stability, bravely facing the darkness, it all leads to this. By working with and transmuting the dross of the Nigredo, something amazing becomes possible. A crack finally opens up in that filter that's been covering your eyes your whole life. And that breakthrough, that's an experience of what's called nirvana, unconditioned reality. It might only last for a split second, but in that moment, the alchemist experiences life directly, with no filters. It is a perspective-shattering glimpse that changes everything forever. And this is so, so important to get. That amazing glimpse, it's not the end of the road. It's actually the starting line for a completely new way of living. The rest of the alchemist's journey is all about learning how to stabilize that insight, how to refine it, until they can actually learn to live in that unconditioned reality all the time. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. This whole alchemical path is about purification, right? It's about stripping away all the layers of programming and belief we call ourself. So I'll leave you with this. If you could actually manage to see reality without any of your filters, what would you see? What would even be left?
You know that feeling when you look back at being a kid? Everything seems so much more vibrant, right? Well, what if that's not just nostalgia? What if the change from childhood to adulthood is a massive shift in how we actually experience reality itself? Today, we're going to dive into that incredible journey, from pure raw experience to a world layered with meaning.
The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche really put his finger on something here. He's pointing to this idea that deep down inside all of us, there's still that child who just wants to play, to experience things directly. But as we grow up, that part gets buried, leaving us with this nagging feeling that we've lost something vital.
So, what happened? Where did that vivid, immediate world actually go? Did it just fade away as we got older and smarter, or did something fundamental about our consciousness actually flip a switch? That's the mystery we're unpacking.
To get to the bottom of it, we have to go way back to a time before we even had words for things. The source material calls this our own personal Garden of Eden, a state of pure, unfiltered, direct experience with the world. Okay, check this out, because this is where it gets really interesting. It's like we live in two completely different realities. A small child's world is all about pure sensation, colors, sounds, textures. But for an adult, it's sensation plus meaning. We don't just see a red cylindrical shape, we instantly interpret it as a cup, That tiny little step changes everything.
And this is what that world feels like. It's an experience that isn't being constantly filtered through language and ideas. There's this incredible direct connection to everything around you. You're just fascinated by being. It's where all that boundless energy and vitality comes from. It's life before the labels.
So if that's the starting point, where did it all change? Well, everything pivots the moment we start learning language. This is the big turning point, the moment we symbolically eat from the tree of knowledge. It's when we begin building that mental filter that really defines what it means to be an adult. And this is the key word for our whole discussion: perception. It's not just what you see or hear. It's that extra layer of meaning, of language, that your brain just slaps on top of every single sensation almost instantly. It's that inner voice that says, that's a tree, that's a car, that's a problem.
Let's use that super simple example again. The cup. Think about how fast this happens. Your eye takes in the raw data, the shape, the color, the light. But before you're even consciously aware of it, your mind has already pulled the file labeled cup. It attaches all the meaning, and boom. You don't experience the raw sensation. Your conscious mind experiences the idea of a cup. And that right there, that's it. Learning to name our world, to put it into neat little boxes, that's the very thing that builds the filter. This knowledge is what separates us from the pure, direct experience we started with.
Okay, so what's the big deal? What happens when we live our entire lives behind this filter? Well, according to the source material, it can become its own kind of prison, a reality constructed entirely inside our own minds. This quote just hits the nail on the head. We think we're experiencing the world, but most of the time we're actually just experiencing our thoughts about the world. We're looking at the menu instead of eating the food, you know? And you can see the potential fallout from that right here. This is where those feelings of being, a little disconnected or alienated can come from. We get caught in these loops of our own thoughts, trapped in this mental cell, and it can cut us off from that vibrant, life-giving experience we once had. And this brings us to that amazing metaphor, the Matrix. It's not about computers and robots. No, the Matrix is this invisible layer of perception, this world of words and meanings that we project onto reality, and then we forget we're the ones projecting it. We mistake the filter for the real thing. But, okay, it's not all doom and gloom. Far from it. Understanding this whole thing, well, it actually opens up a new possibility, a really profound new goal for us as conscious beings. The source compares it to what ancient traditions called the alchemist's great work. And let's be super clear here. The point isn't to try and go backward, to become ignorant or childish again. You can't unlearn everything. No, the goal is much cooler than that. It's about integrating the two, keeping the wisdom of the adult, but learning how to consciously see past the filter. So what's the game plan? How do we even start this great work? Well, it begins by just pondering this, by recognizing that our mental understanding of a sunset is a pale imitation of actually experiencing it. The work is finding a way to lower that filter, to let that pure sensory life back in and merge it with our adult awareness. So that leaves us with this big, fascinating question to chew on. If learning all this stuff, this knowledge, is what built the walls of our own mental prison, then what on earth could possibly be the key to unlock it? Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the pretty cryptic and fascinating world of alchemy. But hold on, we're not talking about literally turning lead into gold. We're looking at something way, way deeper. Alchemy as this incredibly sophisticated symbolic language, one that was designed to transform the human spirit. So, when you see an image like this one, what are you really looking at? Is it some ancient chemistry experiment? Or is it a map? A map that details the evolution of consciousness itself. And that's really the core idea we're digging into today, that the true great work of the alchemists was all happening on the inside. Okay, now here's a quote from our source material that's designed to make you stop and think. The Bible is a book on alchemy. What on earth could that mean? Well, it suggests that, just like alchemy, the Bible uses a kind of symbolic code to talk about the evolution of human consciousness. Think of the Garden of Eden, not as a real place, but as a state of pure original awareness. This is the whole key. To get alchemy, you have to learn to speak its symbolic language. And that leads us right into our first section. To really decode this whole alchemical process, we have to start with a pretty basic question.
Why was this language so secret? I mean, why use symbols at all?
Well, there were a few absolutely crucial reasons. First off, symbols are just perfect for talking about these huge, complex, abstract ideas about how the mind works. Second, it was just practical. I mean, during times of persecution, having a secret language kept this kind of knowledge safe. But honestly, the most important reason is that these symbols were made to speak directly to the soul, to your unconscious mind in a way that just plain words can't. They're like markers for experiences that are so personal, you can't always describe them.
So, how are we supposed to approach all these symbols? It's so easy to get totally lost just trying to memorize them, like words in a dictionary. But if you do that, you're kind of missing the entire point. A much better way to think about them is as signposts on a journey.
And this quote just nails it. The symbols point the way, right? They give us labels for these inner experiences we're having. But mistaking the symbol for the experience, that's like spending all your time studying a map instead of actually taking the trip. The goal isn't to memorize the signpost, it's to actually walk the path that's pointing you down.
So here's the bottom line. While we're learning a very specific symbolic language today, the real goal of the alchemical journey is to eventually move beyond it. You use the map to get to know the territory. But after a while, you develop your own internal compass, your own personal way of making sense of it all.
All right, so if this whole journey is internal, what kind of gear do we need? Let's take a look at the Alchemist's inner toolkit. These are the core concepts that represent the lab, the materials, and even the heat source for this great work of transformation.
First up, you've got the retort. In a laboratory, this is that sealed glass container. But in spiritual alchemy, the retort is you. It represents the alchemist, your own mind and body sealed off from all the outside noise through focus and meditation. It is the container where the entire transformation happens.
So what are we putting inside this retort? That's the raw substance, or what they call the prima materia. And this is basically all of our unexamined psychological baggage. It's our conditioning, our automatic thoughts, our deepest emotions, our memories, everything that makes us who we are right now. This is the lead that the alchemist is trying to purify and transform.
And here's where it gets really cool. The power source. The secret fire isn't a literal flame, not at all. It's the transformative power of your own awareness. It might start as just a tiny spark of curiosity, a simple desire to understand yourself better. But as you apply that sustained attention to your raw substance, that spark grows into a fire of wisdom that literally burns away illusions and reveals the truth of who you are.
Okay, so we've got our toolkit. Now let's see how all these pieces actually come together. It's time to start decoding the process itself, the great work. We're going to look at some of the key symbols that represent the different stages and elements of this inner transformation.
Every great work begins right here, in the Nigredo, or the blackening. This stage is all about a descent into the unknown, about confronting the chaos and confusion of our own raw substance. It's the very first step, and it's absolutely necessary. You have to dissolve the old to make room for the new.
The classic symbol for this stage is a crow or a raven. It represents what a lot of spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul. You know, that really difficult period where your old beliefs and patterns are just falling apart? It feels awful, like despair. But the alchemist knows that this blackness is actually fertile ground. It's the compost from which new understanding is eventually going to grow.
Now, inside this whole process, the alchemists had this amazing shorthand. They used planets and the metals associated with them to represent different parts of our own psyche. Think of it like a recipe. The sun, or gold, that's the end goal, our purified consciousness. But to get there, we have to integrate our moon, which is silver. That's our unconscious, our intuition. We need the drive of Mars, or iron, the sense of harmony from Venus, or copper. And we even need the structure of Saturn, or lead, which represents discipline and our own limitations.
So after all that work in the darkness of the Nigredo, what finally emerges? The lion. The lion is often linked with the sun and gold, and it symbolizes the purified self. We're not talking about ego here. We're talking about a noble strength, a courage, the radiant power of a consciousness that's been put back together and transformed. It's the total opposite of the crow. It's a symbol of illumination. And the ultimate symbol that you've completed the work is something called the rebus, which means the two thing. It's often shown as a figure that's both male and female, holding symbols for the sun and the moon. This represents the final stage, the reconciliation of all opposites. Conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, they all become one harmonious whole.
So now that we've decoded a few of these ancient symbols, let's pull it back to right here, right now. How do we actually move from this old, kind of weird language to a personal, practical understanding?
Well, it's really important to remember that alchemy is just one map. Our source material makes a great point that other systems, like Buddhism, for example, offer different maps. And hey, maybe with language that's a little more accessible to us today, but they are all pointing to the exact same destination, the evolution of consciousness. At the end of the day, the specific language you use is less important than the universal process it's trying to describe. And so, let's end with a question that can turn this whole explainer into your own personal great work. Look inward for a second. What is the raw substance you're working with right now? What are your habits, your fears, your conditioning? And then ask yourself, what is the secret fire? That focused, transformative awareness that you can start applying to it, maybe even today. Thanks for watching.
You know the story, right? These mysterious figures hunched over bubbling potions in secret labs, all trying to turn worthless lead into pure, gleaming gold. It's this classic tale of magic, of greed, and of course, the legendary Philosopher's Stone. But what if we've been reading that story all wrong?
I mean, really think about that. If you ask that one question, the whole thing just changes. Suddenly, it's not some ancient get-rich-quick scheme. It becomes something way more profound. A secret that's been hiding in plain sight for hundreds of years.
Okay, so let's get one thing straight right away. You can't just cook lead into gold. Modern science is pretty clear on this. You need the insane power of a star exploding, a supernova, or a massive particle collider. So if the alchemists weren't literally making gold, what on earth were they actually doing in those labs? To figure that out, we have to look past the chemicals and the furnaces and focus on the alchemists themselves. I mean, who were these people, really?
See, they weren't just early, kind of clumsy chemists. When you dig into the historical record, you find out they were deeply spiritual people, mystics, really. They talked about things like reincarnation and other planes of existence. A lot of them were healers. And this is the big one. They almost always spoke in riddles, codes, and metaphors. Now, why would they do that?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, thanks to the psychologist Carl Jung. He dug into their writings and had this incredible insight. He realized their great work, their opus magnum, wasn't about getting rich. It was about, and I quote, the rescue of the human soul. The real transformation wasn't happening in the flask. It was happening inside the alchemist.
And that's exactly why they needed the code. Think about the time they lived in. Any talk about a personal journey to the divine, of changing your own soul, could get you branded a heretic or way worse. So, talking about turning lead into gold was the perfect cover story for their true and much more dangerous goal, transforming the human self. So let's try to decode this great work. Let's look at their main process, not as some chemical recipe, but as a kind of roadmap for an incredible journey inward.
On paper, the process seems almost straightforward. You take some common stuff, you seal it up completely in a vessel, and then you apply a very gentle, steady heat for weeks, maybe even months. The whole point was something they called solve et coagula, which means dissolve and coagulate. The idea was to break something down to its most basic parts, analyze it, and then put it back together into a new, much purer form. And here it is, the master metaphor, that sealed vessel, the retort, totally cut off from any outside influence. It's not just a piece of glassware, it's you. The great work is really a long, difficult, and totally personal process of looking inward, of self-purification.
Okay, so after all of that intense internal work, what's the big prize at the end? The Philosopher's Stone. But if making actual gold was never the point, then what could this famous stone really do?
Well, the legends about its powers are just wild. First, yeah, it could supposedly create endless amounts of gold. Second, if you took it as a liquid, a tincture, it was said to heal any illness. And third, it gave you the ultimate superpower, immortality. I mean, that's a pretty incredible list of abilities. But hold on. Remember who we're dealing with here. Mystics. People who spoke in riddles. So what if these aren't literal superpowers at all? What if it's all just one big riddle designed to solve the biggest problems we face as humans? What are we really afraid of in life? And this is how you crack the code. The power to create unlimited gold? That isn't about being rich. It's about eliminating the fear of poverty and scarcity. The power to heal any sickness? It's not about medicine. It's about eliminating the fear of illness and decay. And granting immortality? That's about conquering the ultimate human fear, the fear of old age and death itself.
And all of a sudden, you see this isn't about magic wands and potions anymore. This is a highly systematic spiritual practice for overcoming the fundamental causes of human suffering.
Just think about those four things for a second. Poverty, sickness, old age, death. The anxiety of not having enough, the terror of your body breaking down, the dread of getting old and helpless, and the absolute finality of the end. These are the deep core fears that drive so much of human life.
And this is where the story takes a turn that you would probably never expect, because a young prince way back in ancient India was specifically shielded by his father from seeing these exact same things.
When that prince, Siddhartha, the man who would become the Buddha, finally left his palace and witnessed poverty, sickness, old age, and death for the first time, it shattered his world, and it launched his own great work, his search for enlightenment, for the end of suffering. It seems that thousands of miles away, the alchemists of the West were, in their own secret coded way, walking the very same path.
So, if you put it all together, you get a totally new definition. Alchemy wasn't a bad failed science, it was a sophisticated, secret system for spiritual development. It was a Western path to enlightenment, hidden in plain sight, designed to transform the base metal of the ordinary, fearful, suffering self into the pure gold of an awakened human being.
Which of course leaves us with one last thought. The alchemists sealed themselves off from the world to analyze and purify their own being, to break down their fears, their flaws, their limits, and then remake themselves into something better, something purer. So the real question this leaves for you is, what is your great work?
All right, let's talk about a word that gets thrown around a lot, enlightenment. We all kind of think we know what it means, right? But what if everything we assume about it is completely backward? What if the whole point isn't about becoming more of something, but actually becoming less? Let's dive in.
So, okay, let's just jump right into the deep end here. The central paradox of this whole thing is that the path to enlightenment, well, it's not about adding anything new. It's not about self-improvement. Turns out, it's actually a destructive process.
Yeah, I know. That's a pretty intense way to kick things off, right? This quote from the teacher Adyashanti it flips everything on its head. It's not about becoming better or happier. It's about the crumbling away of everything that's not true. It's about seeing through the facade. We're not talking self-improvement here. We're talking self-dissolution.
Okay, so to really start to get this, we have to talk about language, and honestly, the limits of language. There's this classic Zen metaphor that's just perfect for this. It's the finger pointing at the moon. All the words, all the concepts, even what I'm saying right now. It's all just the finger. It's not the moon.
And this right here, this is the whole game. On one hand, you've got the finger. That's the description, the idea, the mental model of a thing. And on the other hand, you've got the moon itself, the actual, direct, unfiltered experience. And the biggest mistake, the trap everyone falls into, is we get so obsessed with studying the finger, we completely forget to even look at the moon. Our understanding of something isn't the thing itself. It's just a map. And, well, you can't live on the map, can you?
Okay, so if the goal is just direct experience, why is it so darn hard to get? Well, it seems like the problem is baked into the very way we see the world. We're kind of caught in this incredibly powerful illusion.
And this image, it just nails it, doesn't it? Our brains are wired to pin things down. We want to define them, label them, put them in a box. But reality? It's not like that. It's fluid. It's a process, not a bunch of static things. Trying to define it is literally like trying to nail smoke to a wall. It just slips right through your fingers every single time.
Let's try to make this a little more real. Here's an analogy for you. Think about the Mississippi River. We all know what that is, right? You can see it on a map, you can point to it. It feels like a solid, definite thing in the world.
But here's the catch. If I asked you to go get me a piece of the Mississippi River, what would you bring me? A bucket of water? I mean, sure, that water came from the river, but is it the river anymore now that it's sitting in your bucket, totally separate from the flow?
And that is the insight. A river isn't a thing at all. It's just a name we give to this constantly changing, continuous process of water flowing. Our mind is what creates the illusion of a solid, stable thing by just slapping a label on it. But that process is never the same from one second to the next. And here's the kicker. We do this with everything. So to help us kind of navigate all this abstract stuff, it's really useful to think of existence in 3 different layers. They're all connected, of course. Think of it like a map for the mind, a way to get our bearings. All right, first up, you've got apparent reality. This is our everyday world, right? The world of things, people, ideas, the stuff we see and touch. But then underneath that, there's conditional reality. This is the layer of unseen forces, mental patterns, what some traditions would call karma, all the stuff that's secretly running the show. And then finally, you get to unconditional reality. This is pure awareness itself, completely free from any definitions. It's also known as nirvana. And the whole point of this entire journey is to see through the illusions of the first 2 layers so you can just rest in the third.
Okay, I know, this is all pretty conceptual and out there. So what does this actually look like in a real person? What's the end result of this destructive process? Let's take a look at the portrait of what's known as an arahant, a fully enlightened being.
And wow, when you look at the qualities of an arahant, you really see how radical this changes. We're not talking about just being a little less scared. We're talking completely fearless. Not just managing your desires, but being totally desireless. No clinging to anything. The whole idea of a separate self just dissolves. And get this one, a vivid, perfect recall of thousands of past lives and thousands of deaths. Can you imagine? When you've directly experienced that, your entire perspective just shatters. Wholesome actions become automatic, not something you have to choose. And that's how they stop creating new karma. That's how they become, in a way, deathless.
Yeah, this quote it really brings it home. Just try to imagine it for a second. Having the direct memory of dying, not once, but thousands of times. After an experience like that, what possible everyday fear or anxiety could still have a grip on you? It's a complete and total reality shift.
So, this brings us right back to where we started. We kicked off with this idea that enlightenment is destructive. But you know what? Maybe a better word is liberating. Because it's not really about gaining some new, shiny thing. It's about being set free from something that was never even real to begin with.
Here's one last simple story to really tie this all together. Picture this. You are absolutely furious, just consumed with anger, because you are 100% convinced a close friend stole something really important from you. And you're suffering, right? The weight of that belief is just crushing you. And then one day, you're cleaning and you find it. It was just misplaced the whole time.
Think about that moment you find it. What happens? You don't gain your friend's innocence back. You just realize in a flash that your belief in their guilt was a total delusion. And the anger? It just vanishes instantly. You didn't get anything new. You were just freed from a mistake. And that, right there, that's the core of awakening. You simply see the delusion.
So in the end, this isn't just some abstract philosophy to think about. It's really a direct invitation to look at our own lives, our own experience. And that leaves us with a pretty personal question to chew on, doesn't it? What illusions, what fingers that we're mistaking for the moon are you ready to see through?